Randy stumbled under the weight of the packs, grabbing at shrubbery to keep from tumbling down the hill. I looked back at him, sighing. I made my way over to his tiny frame, sliding over brightly colored leaves as I grabbed the strap of one of the packs, attempting to lift it from his shoulders. "Here, let me take—" "No!" His brown hair, the same shade as his brother's, masked his eyes as he shook the pack violently, displacing my grip. "I can do it myself!" My hands dropped to my side. A rustling came from behind me and a familiar cologne assaulted me. "Randy, you should know better than to let a lady carry the weight," Kyle chastised, clucking his tongue. "Now, up the hill. It's not that heavy. You're 13 now, a man, so I don't want any complaints." Randy shook his head, flushed face steeling itself to iron as he continued on. "He's not one of your pledges, Kyle. He's your younger brother." "Chelsea, I'm just toughening him up a bit. There's no harm in it." Jack laughed from behind Kyle, pulling 2 beers from his pack and offering one to me. "Lighten up, Chels. We're just messing around." I eyed Jack warily before taking the beer and popping the tab. The 2 boys jogged after Randy, shouting commands at him that sounded far too like a drill sergeant's for my taste. I crossed my arms, pulling my jacket tighter to my chest. There was something off about this part of the woods. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was an electricity buzzing through the air. The feeling one gets before a lightning storm. All hairs crackling, standing on end. I turned my eyes to the sky as I meandered forward, surveying the clear sky and full moon. It was amazingly bright this evening, a perfect night for camping out. I'd always loved the woods. Throughout high school, I was prone to disappear beneath the looming branches. This was certainly nothing new, and something I had avidly enjoyed. However, tonight I felt small and vulnerable. Maybe I'd simply outgrown my old habits. "We're here!" Kyle exclaimed, as Randy threw the gear down, bending forward to rest his hands on his knees and spit into the muddy ground. Jack finished his beer, tossing it into some bushes, walking forward. The tree before us was massive, its roots covering the surrounding ground in about a 3-foot radius around its base. What was most impressive, though, was the fact that it had been split by lightning directly down the center of the trunk, the bark dark along the edges of the now gaping hole. The hole itself was big enough for at least 2 people to stand in comfortably, and somehow had managed to not pose much of a detriment to the tree as its branches stretched forward, leaves golden and red. "So this is it? An old tree?" Jack laughed, shaking his messy blonde hair in disapproval. "There's a good story—" "Save it, Kyle. Nature's calling. I'll listen to your horrifying story later." Jack waved his hands in mock terror before slinking into the expansive greenery before us, disappearing into the abyss. I finished my own beer before setting it down on a rock, reminding myself to pick it up in the morning. I wandered over to where Randy stood, tussling his hair affectionately as he shot me a smile. "All right. Well, since Jack seems to feel like being a dick tonight," Kyle raised his voice, turning to look behind him with a smirk, "I guess I'll just tell the 2 of you." I rolled my eyes at Kyle's dramatics, but felt Randy straighten up a bit, leaning in. "Many years ago, there was a tribe of Indians that lived in the marshlands. It is said that these people were constantly stalked by a creature that the tribe called a Wendigo, a beast that tore the flesh from its victims and bathed in their blood, often preferring the flesh of the dead to sate its hunger. It was rumored that the creature had once been a member of their tribe that had gone insane, eating his own wife and child. Because of this, these people were feared by the surrounding tribes, and when the white men entered to remove this tribe from their territory, they were warned by the other natives. The white men dismissed the warnings and entered the marshlands, demanding that the chieftain move his people from the land. In an attempt to appeal to the white men, the chieftain gave his only daughter to the leader of the group, Thomas Ditney. When Ditney looked upon the beautiful woman, he fell madly in love with her, drawing up a truce with the chieftain and marrying the girl the next morning. With the truce, the peoples lived in harmony and often traded and socialized with one another. Until, late one night, the beautiful Indian wife of the now governor ran screaming into the white village, babbling about an ancient creature before falling dead onto the square. Ditney was so broken by the sight of his dead wife that he forbid anyone to bury her, laying a bouquet of roses in her hands every morning. Her death marked the beginning of the killings. Men, women, and children began to turn up slaughtered every night, stripped of flesh and devoid of blood. Even corpses began to be torn from their graves, bloated bodies missing rotting flesh. The villagers began to talk as the body in the square began to rot, flesh peeling from the woman's bones. They wondered why a dead body in the open would be left untouched by this creature. It was an easy meal, unless, of course, she was working with the creature. The townspeople showed up at Ditney's doorstep, demanding an answer, and in fear, Ditney blamed the chief. It was his daughter, after all. The villagers quickly assembled, leading an attack on the Indians, blaming the chief for his curse. The chieftain tried to explain that the beast that was hunting them was not under his control, or that of the tribes, but the townspeople would not listen, and a war began. The white men emerged victorious, and what was left of the tribe fled through the village, congregating in the woods for safety. The very first night the Indians set foot on this ground, that tree, Kyle pointed at the tree, turning on his heel and stalking over to it, running a hand along its bark for effect, was struck by lightning, the very moment an injured warrior died in his crying mother's arms. The Indians took this as a sign that this was the tree of death, and that the dead should be cremated in its base. As they burned the bodies of the fallen warriors, the crying mother, stricken with grief and covered in blood, walked to the outskirts of the woods, bringing with her an offering, and called to the Wendigo. After several hours, it came to her, and she fell to her knees, imploring it to listen. The humanity that was left in the beast was moved by her grief and allowed her to speak, granting her a single request. The woman begged for the beast to avenge her son by protecting this area from the white men and immortalizing his memory in this very tree. After stating this, she bowed her head, allowing the beast to cut it off in a single swipe. Randy jumped into me, and Kyle looked back at us, smiling. The payment had been sealed, and they say that, to this day, the beast still wanders these woods, protecting Warrior's legacy, waiting for someone to desecrate the ground so that it may strike again. A rustling sounded from the bushes, and Kyle spun around, his face going white. What is it?" Randy asked, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Knock it off, Kyle," I yelled, rubbing Randy's back soothingly. "You're scaring him." Before Kyle could respond, a black figure jumped from the bushes, tackling Kyle to the ground. He shrieked, "Randy! Randy, run!" Without question, Randy took off, sprinting into the woods and vanishing between the trees. "Randy! Randy! Come back!" I called, turning when I heard the sound of raucous laughter from the two boys rolling on the ground. Jack pulled the black hood of his sweatshirt down, slapping a breathless Kyle on the back. "You see him run?" "Shut up," That was terrible. I clenched my fist before bending down, throwing leaves and sticks at the pair. Whoa, whoa, Chels. Calm down. It was just a joke. We're less than a mile from my house. He'll be fine. Kyle stood, pinning my arms to my side as he spoke, trying to avoid the assailing foliage. He let me go as I covered my face, shaking my head. He's just a kid, Kyle. You shouldn't scare him like that. I felt exhausted. Dealing with the two of them and their insensitive jokes was beyond tiring. Alright. I'll make it up to him tomorrow. And I'll call Mom to make sure he made it home safe, okay? Kyle gave me a lopsided smile, and I slowly acquiesced. Jack stood, stumbling slightly before regaining his balance. I couldn't help but chuckle. You finished the rest of the beer? Jack simply glared in response before the corners of his mouth turned upwards into a self-satisfied smirk. Not all of it, but that does remind me. Jack walked over to the tree before unzipping his fly. I made a disgusted noise before covering my eyes, burying my face in the chest of a chuckling Kyle. Let's see how Mr. Beastie likes that. Jack slurred slightly, walking over to his pack and picking it up. Kyle gently lifted my chin up with his index finger, looking into my eyes. Hey, there's an abandoned house up the way a bit. Why don't we sleep in there tonight, huh? A little bit more privacy? Kyle rubbed his nose against mine, and I raised an eyebrow. I don't think I've forgiven you quite yet. Kyle flipped his hair to the side, eyeing me closely with a grin. Well, we've got all night now, don't we? The walk to the abandoned house was relatively peaceful. Kyle called his mom shortly after we'd arrived, and, after a good berating by his mother, confirmed that Randy had in fact made it home. Kyle began to put sleeping bags down as Jack wandered around the house, another beer in hand. When Kyle was finished, Jack coincidentally excused himself, disappearing out of the hole that had once sported a front door. Well, that was convenient timing. Kyle looked at me innocently, returning to his bag, searching for something in its depths. It really was, wasn't it? Almost... He paused, pulling a single red rose from his pack, eyeing me over the red petals, like we planned it. I smiled as he leaned in, pressing my lips against his as he pressed the flower into my hands. Listen, I know that we haven't seen eye to eye lately. He cleared his throat. But I wanted you to know that I really do care about you, and... A scream tore through the woods, echoing off the empty walls of the house. Kyle shot to his feet, fumbling for the flashlight. Jack! We both ran from the house and down the steep incline. Kyle was sweeping the flashlight back and forth, muttering nervously under his breath. We broke away from the brush, entering into a clearing, a road visible on the other side. There was a steep hill to our right, and I turned, assuming that Jack had attempted to drunkenly climb it. The lights from a passing car had flashed across the field, and from the corner of my eyes, I caught the glimpse of something reflective. Kyle was still calling Jack's name, returning to the tree line to search. I stood still, surveying the hill as another set of headlights drew near, shining onto the humanoid creature above me. It was easily 6 feet tall, hunkering close to the ground, as it moved on all fours in a sweeping gait. I could make out the contour of its spine poking through its reflective skin, its ribs jutting out with extreme emaciation. As it slinked forward, its wrists twisted unnaturally, and its thin legs strained as it pulled itself forward. Suddenly, its head turned in my direction, empty sockets with an eerie yellow glow staring at me vacantly. Its mouth dropped open in what appeared to be a silent scream, taut cheeks pulling inwards. I nearly screamed, covering my mouth with my hands as the thorns of the rose pierced my face. The thing let loose a sickening howl, its body contorting as it launched itself down the hill, barreling towards me. "Kyle! Kyle!" I turned on the spot, blood dripping down my hands as I clenched the rose in my fist, sprinting through the woods, the beam of Kyle's flashlight blinding me as I approached. What is... He never finished the sentence, the creature knocking me to the ground before sinking its claws into Kyle's chest and violently pulling up on Kyle's ribcage, its other hand sliding downwards, intestines falling from Kyle's abdomen as he screamed, his hands attempting to pick them up and put them back inside his torn flesh. His mouth open and closed, blood frothing from his pale lips, his eyes rolling back in his head. I tried to stand, but found I couldn't. Something warm was rolling down my face and into my eyes, blurring my eyesight and leaving me terribly dizzy. I watched, horrified, as a long forked tongue emerged from the creature's mouth, stabbing into Kyle's jugular as a crude gulping noise emanated from the creature's bobbing throat. I pushed myself to my feet, crab walking away from it, before falling into a ditch beside the dirty road. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, the screen flashing on as I unlocked it. Again, I heard the horrible howl as the creature swiped the phone from my hand, repeatedly slicing at it with its claws until the device turned black. I could hear its wheezing breath and make out its features from where I lay. Its skin was like a metallic fluid, reflective with little spikes rising here and there as it moved, flattening into a glass-like surface when it stilled. It had no nose, its mouth an empty hole that seemed to have no end. I sobbed in abject fear, the creature finally turning to face me, and when its gaze met mine, only swirling pools of yellow mist peered back at me. Slowly, it turned its head to the side. A single, bloody, clawed appendage reached toward me, and I screamed. It recoiled slightly, before reaching out again, poking something in my hands. The rose. Its claws lightly traced the flower before it leaned in, wheezing breath, lightly teasing my face. "Please," I began, but as quickly as it had come, it was gone, the body of Kyle disappearing with it. The police say they found me around midday the next morning, unconscious and clutching onto a rose for dear life. They found the bodies of Kyle and Jack nearly 3 days after the incident, ruling it as an animal attack, although the report was scarcely detailed, no animal ever being identified. I recovered from the whole ordeal and returned to college in a year, my parents suggesting that we should move so that I can start to forget the whole experience, and I did, for the most part. I went to therapy and took all of the medication I was prescribed. It wasn't until I moved into my new apartment that I realized I would never forget. Even now, as I look out my apartment window into the small patch of woods from my bedroom window, I can see it there, staring back at me, patiently waiting. Because no matter how many variations of stories I read, or how many folklore specialists I consult, they can all say one thing for certain about the Wendigo. The Wendigo never forgets.
A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia Trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forest from Rankin County to Pierceburg in Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less known trails, which is exactly what we're looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to start the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured out by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to go home to our own beds. It was early October and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people or didn't want them to come to us in the middle of the night, so we decided to ignore all those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around and we found a spot little off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up a camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went for sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I was awoke by my girlfriend shaking me awake telling me, "Get your gun, someone is outside walking around her tent." She informed me that she woke up to the sound like someone right outside the tent running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such long hikes in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack and then we sat up silently listening to any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but a breeze blowing through the trees, then I heard it. Snap, crunch, snap, someone or something walking in the woods behind her tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had went out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away, so to not give away that I was out of the tent and have it become a shiny beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, snap, crunch, crack. It sounded like it was bipedal based on the way steps were placed. I turned on my flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out, told him to go away and that I was armed. I kept the flashlight on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and faced my light that way. And then, from the original spot here, who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened and I end up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a blueprint in some soft moist dirt not far away from our tent. It wasn't mine and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around her tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girlfriend out any more than she already was. At this point we were pretty deep in and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place a tent in a small overhang to prevent anyone from coming behind us. The whole day to this point I had a feeling that we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up a camp and made some food and then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911 and I kept the judge right next to me as I assured if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while she drifted off to sleep and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the wood at night. I was awake for a few hours just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point I guess my exhaustion caught up with me and I drifted off. I woke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through my stuff outside her tent and I woke my girlfriend shushing her to be quiet. From a faint glow of the fire I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them along the lines of, "We are armed, get the fuck out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was there had fled. There was a creek nearby and I walked to the edge where there was a small trail running along the side of it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other sides of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people taking off in the woods and hearing branches snap quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was following us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long ways from anywhere and quite literally on our own. Since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out there, it felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded the corner, I turned around and saw someone step out of the trail and just standing there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. Couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us, or maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out.
I grew up in a very small town where you know everyone and so on. Because we lived so remote, we didn't often have fresh fruit and vegetables in stock. We had a fruit and vegetable truck that would drive down every second Tuesday, while some people would grow their own fruit and vegetables. The guy who drove the truck parked in 3 spaces in town: the Point, Midtown, and the High Banks, his last stop, and at the end of my street. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mother would give me some money and send me to go get fruits and vegetables. The main important ones to her were potatoes and tomatoes. Originally, when I started walking down there were no issues, yet this neighbor with a tall fence started stopping to talk to me when I walked down the street. I didn't like talking to him because he was weird, annoying, and pushy, yet as a kid I had to stop and listen to him. It started getting so bad, he would wait for me every second Tuesday to stop me and make me talk to him. One day, because of it, I missed the truck due to him stopping me for so long and blocking me so I couldn't get away. My mother gave me a hiding with a wooden spoon for missing the truck, so I tried to avoid him when I went to go to the truck. He started swearing at me because I wouldn't stop to talk to him, and running around him when he tried to block my path. One afternoon, there were no tomatoes, and being a kid I thought I might get another hiding, so I was sulking on my walk home, forgetting about the neighbor who suddenly jumped out and asked why I was so sad, and I said it was because they had no tomatoes. He told me he was growing his own tomatoes and I could have some for free, so I agreed to go into his yard. But when I stood in the yard, he tried to get me to go in his house, like taking me by my free hand to try to lead me in. I cannot type in proper detail of what happened next, but I will attempt it. It's like everything slowed down. All the hair on my arms stood up and I got goosebumps. My hearing got really clear, and I could hear all the sounds of the birds and the wind. Also, it was late afternoon, but it looked darker than usual. I also could smell everything from the wet grass to the dead leaves. When I got closer to the door, I saw a crusty potato sack in the yard with flies around it. There was coppery marks on it and smelled like rotten mints. The inside of his doorway was pitch black. I started feeling a mix of dread and illness. Then he turned back and smiled, showing his teeth. I immediately pulled my hand back and ran home. I told my idiotic mother what happened, who was actually disappointed I didn't get free tomatoes. I sort of think I may have gotten murdered if I went in there, since the feeling I got when he was trying to lead me to his house was so sickly I almost vomited when I got home. I've never experienced anything like it before or after.
Every child's fear. You remember the feeling, don't you? The feeling that you are being watched. That if you make the slightest movement, you're dead. Everybody had that fear as a child. You wake up in the middle of the night. Can't get back to sleep. Shuffling back and forth from one uncomfortable position to the next. Hoping to find a way to sudden slumber. You give up. There's no way you're going back to sleep anytime soon. So you simply turn to your side and stare out the window. The road, the lights, the trees, all seem so strange under the cover of night. You try to keep your mind quiet of any distractions, remembering that you still need to sleep, and that's when the feeling hits you. The feeling swarms over you like an ice-cold blanket that has just been spread across your back. You remember that it is night, and that night is when fear likes to hunt. You feel almost as if you are being watched from behind. You can't see it, but its eyes are trained on you. You want to move, but you can't. If you do, something bad, no, something horribly wrong is going to happen to you. The only thing you can do is remain calm and quiet.
and still, and then it won't notice you. As you lie on your bed, frozen in fear, you begin to think about your bed sheets. If only you could quickly grab your bed sheets and throw them over yourself to hide your body from whatever evil monstrosity stands behind you. It could be done, perhaps. If you're fast and precise enough, you could succeed. You decide to think no longer. You flip yourself up and grab your bed sheets with both hands. Without looking around the room, you swipe back down, covering yourself with a thick blanket safely. It is then that your mind comes back to you, and you remind yourself that there is nothing there. Darkness clouds the mind and causes it to hallucinate, with the only limitation being your imagination. You slowly poke your head out of the sheets and scan your eyes around the room. Nothing. You place your head back on the pillow and softly drift off to sleep. This is every child's fear, and parents always tell their children to go back to sleep, and that it is good for them to work through their fears. They aren't wrong, because what they don't know is that when the children hide under their bed sheets, the real fear is not what is standing over them, but what is staring at them from under the covers.
This is something that happened to me when I was in my previous house a while back. It all started one night when me and my family returned home from bowling, and my father said he had left the back door unlocked by mistake. But luckily, it appeared as if no one broke into our house. How wrong we were. Every third night I'd hear this tapping noise in the floorboards, under the carpet ever so slightly. I usually ignored it, as I thought it was just a pipe from the boiler vibrating against the floorboard. When it came to me playing my video games, I'd find controllers out of place or the game stacks were shuffled up. I was kind of a geek, so I would assign the games from A to Z. Sometimes I'd get these whispers of my name in a very low pitch. I thought it was my brother playing tricks on me, so I kept replying, "Go back to bed, you crap stain." One night, my father went into my room and said, "Don't tell me this tapping's keeping you awake." I replied back with a nod, and so we unscrewed the floorboards. And then we saw something you'd never ever want to see in your life. It was a homeless person, with bloody bones of an unidentifiable dead animal. He kept staring at my dad with a toothless grin. Then he charged at him with a rusty knife. My dad managed to disarm the man and knock him out. In the meantime, I called the police and explained the situation. A police cruiser came in under 10 minutes, and they arrested the homeless man.